Good afternoon, everyone. It is wonderful to see your faces popping up on the screen, um, by far better than the black screen with just your name on it. So welcome. I'm very glad that you could join us for the next hour of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute's monthly forum called Vital Aging. Excuse me. It's a member forum where we get to discuss topics in the experience of aging. And so as the hour progresses, please post your comments or questions in the chat, and then we'll speak for probably about 30 minutes. Tom will speak. And then you can also raise your hand. If you know Tom and want to ask him a question personally, or if you just want to ask your question yourself, just raise your hand. And Max, our inimitable force behind the technology, will call upon you. Now, today, our guest, I'm quite looking forward to this, is teacher, writer, publisher, surfer, Tom Farber. He's been living between Berkeley and Oahu, and I think many of us argue that he is our generation's writer. He is an award-winning writer of more than 40 works, 6 that are fiction, 12 nonfiction, a screenplay, epigrammatic essays, and writings accompanied by photographic work, which were collaborations with photographers. He's also been, in addition to writing all this time, he has been teaching creative writing. And for the last several decades, has been teaching in the creative writing program at Berkeley's English department. I find that feat alone kind of remarkable, since I know so many writers can't write when they're teaching. And so you have managed to juggle the balls. I have to say that I read your first fiction collection of Who Wrote the Book of Love in 1978. It was a gift from the man I had just fallen in love with. And I have been really excited to read your 2 recent books, Turning 70, Turning 80, Penultimates, both of which you will talk about today. So without any further comment, Tom, I'd like you to begin. And I want to ask you just one question as you begin to formulate what you want to say about the 2 books. How does your own writing about aging affect your experience of aging?
Oh, thank you, Susan, and thank you for having me here today. Basically, my life as a writer, whether it was in fiction or nonfiction or the epigrammatic, has been driven by what I felt I needed to understand and then try to describe. And in the course of describing it, come to understand it better. You mentioned Who Wrote the Book of Love, which was published in 1977. That was a book of very short fictions that were like fables about people falling in and out of love, because the times had changed for people in my era. Suddenly, the world was different. And so I felt a hunger to describe that, but also in the describing to understand it. Similarly, when I was obsessed with surfing, I still am, the ocean, I wanted to understand what the ocean was in as many ways as I could. I wanted to read the great writers about ocean, and then I wanted to respond to them with my own thoughts. So it wasn't a great surprise to me that starting in my early 60s with a book called Brief Nudity. Brief Nudity used to be one of those guides for what kind of movie you'd see, like adult content. So Brief Nudity was one of the motion picture codes. And in brief nudity, I was in my early 60s, but I was beginning to see people aging around me, and of course, beginning to have repairs. And I had narrowly averted dying with a miraculous rescue. So, and then later, in my around age 70, I wrote a book called Here and Gone. And in Here and Gone, I took the conversation about aging further, which brings me to Acting My Age, which came out 3 years ago. And I was 77 then. And Penultimates, which came out this year, and now I'm 80. So in these books, what I'm trying to do is one of the things I'm trying to do is to make music. For me, writing is like being a musician. That's the form I'm working in. But why this subject of being older? Well, because I'm trying to inform myself by paying attention to the world around me, but also to what I read and what I see. So these two books are to educate myself, but also to give me the craft pleasure of working in a medium I love to be in. Sometimes writing is a mania, gets out of control. Sometimes writing is like a life raft, it saves you. And particularly, for instance, with Acting My Age, which was written, as we got toward just as the pandemic began, is when I completed it. And then Penultimates was written during the early years of the pandemic. So in some ways, writing was ever more a close companion and illuminating the world around us. Some people say that finishing a book is like having a baby. I've never seen it that way. But I think that writing is sometimes like building a house, and you're starting, from empty ground. And then you're doing the foundation, and then all the many, many steps that it takes to build a house. The difference being that the writer gets to live in the house while construction is going on, while the writer is building the house. And then finally, there's this moment when the house is done. And in my case, that becomes the first time that I'm not the only reader of the book, which is very interesting. All that time, I was the reader I had in mind. But now the book becomes a public event, and that's always interesting, that enormous transition to see how other people respond. The editor who sought me out in my early 20s, she had read some pieces I wrote in an underground paper, and she asked me to do a book. That was miraculous, I hadn't expected such a thing. Well, she recently read Penultimates, and she got in touch with me. And she wrote that the book for her was beautifully written, but also that it spoke to her. And I suppose that's what one is hoping for from others. The famous French 20th century writer, a kind of a playful man, he said that when he wrote a book, he hoped that the reader, after he was gone, that the reader would reincarnate him by reading the book and even begin to look and sound like him. I don't ask that, but I do hope that there are readers for whom what I've learned and what I've tried to describe is not only instructive, but also beautiful. That's my hope.
It is beautiful. And I think one of the values that I see is that you integrate not only your experience and the questions that are animating your curiosity and the need for discovery, but you also bring in other things that you've read. And so certainly in penultimates, you mention all these writers and
Yeah.
thinkers and the quote that you're remembering at the moment that informs your experience at that moment. And you give each of those writers, thinkers, their lifespan when they were
Yes.
born and when they died. And I thought, oh, this is wonderful, form and function.
Yeah. It's kind of wicked. It's kind of wicked because people don't really pay attention to the longevity of the life of the writers and artists that we're reading or seeing. And so pretty much every time in penultimates that I mention someone, in parentheses, I put their birth and death date. And sometimes it's very sobering how short a life they had. As for the writers that I'm quoting or responding to, uh, for instance, my mother, Norma Farber, she died in 1984. She wrote 35 books. She was an amazing person. Uh, and she was one of her poet mainstays was Wallace Stevens, not someone I've read a great deal about. But when I was writing Penultimates, I was going through my bookcase and I came across my mother's anthology of his poetry. And I'm leafing through the whole thing, looking what can help me understand, what can move me or teach me from Wallace Stevens. And I came across this poem toward the end. And at the end of it, it goes like this. Each person completely touches us with what he is and as he is in the stale grandeur of annihilation. Well, the first time I read that, I kind of said, oh, this is too much for me. I'm just a country boy. But then I went and I read it again. Each person completely touches us with what he is and as he is in the stale grandeur of annihilation. And then I realized that Wallace Stevens had given me something rich, because then when I walked up to the former French hotel in the morning and I saw the older folks sitting there having coffee, I realized that they were in the stale grandeur of annihilation. And that was new to me. So what I was looking for when I read writers, and I have stacks and stacks of books that toward that subject, I'm looking for what can teach me something and what I can respond to. Sometimes people say foolish things, and I try to respond to those too. For instance,
before you go to a foolish thing,
yeah.
let's not leave that French hotel conversation exchange that you had in the parking lot where the man says that his wife is going through major surgery. And at that point, he says, or you say, this moment is either aspirational or resignation.
Yes.
And I think
Yeah.
that really stuck with me. The aspirational and the I can't even say
Yeah.
the sort of resignation.
Yes.
But at any rate, but that was very poignant. You picking up such an incredible, just a passing conversation, with friends that then had
That,
all sorts of importance, and obviously bringing Wallace Stegner into it.
yeah. The French hotel has some very talented people there at 6:30 in the morning, and this particular fellow was a poet, awfully talented, and so sometimes the choice of words illuminates feeling richly. That's part of the music of language. As for the foolishness, let me just mention that our former president, now running for office, had an economic advisor named Larry Kudlow. And Kudlow had trouble with drugs. This is public knowledge. He's spoken of it. And he also had health issues, and he's spoken of that too. So at one point, someone's interviewing him, asking him about, the prime rate or something like that. And Larry Kudlow said, well, it won't change in my lifetime. Well, this is a man in the 70s with, various issues, as they say. And so it amused me when I read this to think about what did he imagine was the span of the rest of his lifetime. Was he talking about 10 years or 20 years or 30 seconds? So I try to listen to how people talk about aging. Death itself is not exactly my concern, but I would say this stage of life. For me, this is a year in which a sibling died, several close friends died, and so on. And this is not unusual, right? We all are well aware of that. So I try to listen to how people talk about the stage we're in. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that we have talked about is how to begin to think of one's death and about being mortal. And, I found that even the subtitle of Penultimates, which is next to
the
last.
Now and the Not Yet. Yeah.
So again, that wonderfully humane sort of pivot that we all have to make. You did mention, so it sounds like, so in being able to write about one's life and integrate one's knowledge in the way that you have, and use the writing process for discovery. The question then, as you look back, you've got fiction and nonfiction, photography you're commenting on, screenplays that you're writing on, a screenplay that you've written. How close can writing get to the actual feeling? And if in fact the writing is beautiful and the experience is horrendous, how do you handle that tension?
Well, the words can't save us, but words can illuminate things for us. So the provocation for Penultimates was responding to Ernest Becker's book, The Denial of Death. Ernest Becker was, when I was young, he was a professor at Cal, didn't get tenure, was at San Francisco State, didn't get tenure, ended up in Canada. He died at age 49. He had published already, I think, 4 books. His 5th book, The Denial of Death, came out as he died and won the Pulitzer Prize the year after, posthumously. Becker was arguing that that a lot of our lives are spent denying death. He probably believed that was more extensive than I do, in the sense that when I was young, and I think for many years, I was just alive. I was terribly alive. I wanted more. But there, of course, is a point in our lives when we're well aware that our lives are finite. Mark Strand, the poet, said, "In a world without heaven, all is farewell. Farewell, no matter what." Wow. Well, that's pretty trippy to have to come to terms with. And I think in different ways, we either do come to terms with it, or, as Ernest Becker argued, deny it. it's awfully hard to wrap one's mind around it, or to make peace with it. So this book, Penultimates, I was trying to not deny death. I'm not trying to write about death itself or what happens afterwards, but I'm trying to write about how we think and feel as it gets closer, as other people we know closely die, as our lives are diminished by the death of those people who are irreplaceable to us, right? Uh, so it's a rich experience to try to take that in, but I don't imagine, since I'm the child of two very secular folks, my physician father and my poet mother. I don't expect that there is an afterlife I can describe, but I can try to describe who we are at this part of our life, because of course a lot of it is very rich. Just this morning I was walking down the street, and there once again are those fritillaries. I once thought they were monarchs, and then a neighbor explained to me that they weren't. They were fritillaries. They look a little bit like monarchs, and they are amazing. And today there were 6 of them. And because I'm on foot as much as possible, I pay a lot of attention to what's right at hand. What can I see? One day I was looking at the fritillaries, and I was intent, staring at them. And people were just passing by, pedestrians and bicyclists and stuff, without stopping to see what this older fella was looking at so intently, which I found sort of strange. I was transfixed by the fritillaries. And then a neighbor, Manuel, came by, and he stopped. And we were looking at the fritillaries together, and he asked, how are you doing? And I said, I'm pissed off. And he said, why? And I said, well, here I was transfixed by the fritillaries, and nobody else was stopping to look at them. And Manuel, who is a student of life and makes an effort to help others, Manuel said, here, listen to this. And he gave me these words: awe, gratitude, acceptance, forgiveness. And he had me repeat that. And I realized he was helping me think about this a little bit differently. Awe, gratitude, forgiveness, acceptance. So there are these kind of moments in ordinary life too, both the fritillaries, but also a friend stopping and giving you something rich.
You are, as I'm listening to you talk, not only along for the walk, wondering what fritillaries, are they smaller than monarchs? Is that part of it? That they're
just slightly different coloring. Because I'm not an ornithologist, is that it? No, I'm not. That's not what a lepidopterist. I wanted them to be monarchs, but they weren't. But they turned out to be miraculous and omnipresent at one house down the street. They keep coming back, and for me, it's a miracle. And I feel, I hate to say blessed, but that'll catch it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking about you as the writer teacher, and that you have been in the classroom with the generations. Has it been 20 years, 30 years, 40 years that you've been teaching? Many years, right? And you've been teaching creative writing. And so the way in which they're able to capture their thoughts and use writing as their forms of discovery, are you seeing generational changes?
Well, I mostly lately have been teaching graduate courses. So these are people in their early 20s to early 40s from different graduate programs, all different parts of the university. And it's very rich for me because, of course, I get to talk about stuff that's of interest to me, but I also get to try to help them tell the story that they want to tell. And this is creative nonfiction, right? I don't try to teach fiction writing any longer, just because I feel I can make more progress in a semester with graduate students in nonfiction. What's interesting is I can be demanding. That is, so that's a good thing to teach people, that they're going to have to deliver as best they can. But also, one of the things that happens to me as I get older, as I've gotten older, is that I sort of see them in archetypal terms. That is, none of us is completely in the world for the first time. There's been someone like us before. And because I'm older, I've seen people like some of my students before, or I've seen people with the kind of joys or the kind of struggles that they have before. And so that it puts me in a funny position sometimes, because there's no reason they should know what I know at their age. I didn't know it, and I'm not expecting them to know it, but it adds a richness, oddly. Or it did until recently, because I just became emeritus at age 80. So it's possible I'll teach as a visitor coming back to Cal, but I think in the time remaining, I'll have a lot of writing to try to do, and human interaction to try to do. Yeah.
Well, that's great. If any of you have questions or comments, I just received a comment. Brian Murphy would like to ask a question or make a comment. Max, could you unmute him?
Okay, Brian, you can unmute yourself when you're ready.
Hello, Tom.
Hello, Brian. How to you?
I believe it's been a modest 57 years since you and I
actually, something like that.
So there is some continuity here. That's the question I wanted to raise with you. There seems to me to be this this tension in the writing in the book, which I quite liked, between the obviousness of disruption, but again and again continuity. You return, particularly to the bay, to the water, to the seaside, to the animals, even the fritillaries. There's this invocation or imagery of continuity. Things continue, and it's not even that things evolve; they just are, and they will be. And then just death is a kind of disruption in that, a kind of severing of it. But it's not, at least in my reading of it, your experience isn't of it because you can't yet experience it. I can't remember who the philosopher was who argued that we can't really think death because to do so implies knowledge of it only available from the other side. And therefore,
the art critic Peter Chauvel, I think is how he says his name. He said death is more like painting than sculpture because we can only see one side of it. I thought that was that's the kind of thing that just lifts my heart up, to come across that. And in any case, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just I wanted just to ask whether or not sort of what you learned in the writing of the book about continuity or durability or continuation, whatever, however you describe it, or feel it, or experienced it. Have you stepped back from the writing of the book and thought about that?
Well, if I understand your question, my father was a doctor and an amazing fellow. Helped create the field of chemotherapy and cancer. He built the first hospital in the world for children with cancer. I never heard him speak about an afterlife, and long after his death, there's still a hospital with his name on it, the Dana-Farber Cancer Research Center. So my father is both gone, but his life's work continues on. My mother, who was also very secular, neither of them spoke of the afterlife that I know of, but my mother loved the Torah stories and the New Testament stories, and she loved to redo them. So she left 35 books. But she didn't speak about, what would remain, but there the books are. And I can still read them. And people are still going to my father's hospital. So how that all fits together for me, I don't know, because as you're living this later stage of life, you're also losing friends. And that experience, like the death of my friend Bob, which I write about at length in Penultimates, you're well aware that that person is irreplaceable, that friendship that you shared, the whole banter, that's gone. So I don't have a simple conclusion to draw, except that I'm amazed that that more people my age don't become more, I would say, more tolerant of what's coming. And the ones who ignore it seem to me not fully awake. Yeah, something like that.
Thanks.
I hope that was responsive.
It is. And I'll continue the theme in person, coffee at the hotel.
Okay, I look forward. Thank you. Yeah.
6:30 at the French Hotel.
Yeah.
Forget
6:20. 6:20. Yeah.
Okay.
My mother, the poet, she had some things to say about mortality. One of her poems was called "Come Learn of Mary," the Christ's mother. And here's how it goes. So, come learn of Mary. Who can't rejoice, come learn of me, that holds a baby on my knee and keeps him safe for what's to be. Who can't rejoice, come learn of me, who holds a baby on your knee and keeps him safe for what's to be. So, that could leave you thinking. My mother also wrote, 20,000 waves of days have come over me. Still not enough for drowning. 20,000 waves of days have come over me. Still not enough for drowning. And she also wrote of her long marriage to my father. Oh, love, my other wing.
Oh,
Oh, love, my other wing. And she also wrote,
right.
apology will be my death, the poet said beneath her breath, unless death one day proved to be my only true apology. So, what do you make of this when you have all of these people offering you things that are so instructive about our lives? And one response is that one can try to kind of speak back what you've absorbed, what you know. And so that I view particularly Penultimates and Acting My Age, I view them as invitations to come along with me. Vade mecum, they say in Latin. Come along and see what I was reading, what I was thinking, how I was responding, and see if it enriches your experience. And sometimes, what I'm responding to uh, is foolishness, kind of. Sylvester Stallone just says, it's a fight and you got to keep fighting. Well, yes and no. Uh, the uh, the 20th century writer, French writer John Berger, he said that one thing that would console him about dying would be the idea of his skeletal remains and his wife's commingling. And, in that kind of thing, I feel like, well, that really wouldn't cheer me up one way or the other. But it interested me that people want to find ways to make an affirmation. So, but John Burgess is not, the idea of skeletal remains of the beloved and oneself commingling. For me, that isn't going to do it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Your relationship to your parents.
Yeah.
How,
I invented them.
yeah, well,
I mean, they've been gone. My father's been gone more than 50 years. My mother's been gone more than 40. Well, she's been gone 40 years. I do feel as though I've made them up, but I didn't. Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, certainly in your writing, you feel how much you treasured them. And the point at which you talk in Penultimates about your mother's stroke and
Yeah.
how much you knew that she was there, even when she was not conscious or was conscious in a different way.
Yeah.
Must have,
One of the interesting things was my siblings and I, we couldn't save her, could we?
yeah.
The other thing that strikes me now, as I look back on that time, is that my siblings and I all did what we could, which was a great thing about them, I thought. But also, now I realize that after my father died, my mother had another decade and more where she was a widow. And she wrote very beautifully about that. There's a remarkable book she wrote called Year of Reversible Loss. Year of Reversible Loss, in which, of course, she's lost something, my father. But what's lost when you lose someone? You see? I mean, clouds dissipate, but they're not lost. And so my mother begins, who paid great attention to the natural world, she tries to in this work of prose and poetry to see what's lost and what remains. One thing that, as I look back now at her and those last 10 years and more of her life, is I realized that in my late 30s before she died, I really didn't understand what she might have been experiencing. And that's kind of sobering. I wasn't a kid, was I? But that's maybe the way it is, that there are some things at different stages of our life we just can't grasp about others.
And I think, have you found, I have found this to be true of me, that I think of my parents quite differently now. As I became of age in my 60s. Both of them, unfortunately, died young, 69 and 72. But I think of them not only just connecting up with them at that age, but also kind of rethinking, different things that happened in life to sort of see things perhaps more from their perspective. Did you do that? You probably didn't need to do that.
Oh, no, I did. Fortunately, at this stage of life, I don't think I can go back and change things. I do toy with the idea at the end of Penultimates that my next book, the one that I might write, that I have notes for, would be called Ultimates. And Ultimates would necessarily include amends. In Kapilani Park in Honolulu, there's these beautiful banyan trees. And under the banyan trees, there are different kinds of recovery groups, all kinds. And so you sometimes see 40 or 50 people sitting there having a meeting, and they talk about making amends. And a surf buddy of mine was in one of the groups, and he told me about the different kinds of amends. So I suppose one thing you could do is go on a trip around the country or around the world to make amends, if you could. Or you could simply try to write about making amends and tell the story as truly as you can. There are some people we know, we feel deeply that all they're doing is digging themselves into a deeper hole in their old age. I could mention a former president, for instance. I mean, you kind of wonder, doesn't that person want to stop and try to start cleaning things up? On the other hand, one of the odd things about me now being my age is that when I was young, everyone was supposed to try hard to do better, to make themselves better, to make more of themselves. That was the religion that was instilled in all of us in my community. But I've perhaps oddly reached the point where I feel that people just are what they are. And you can choose who you hang around, and you can try to help bring out the best in others as you see it. But they just are what they are. And for me, that's sort of a new notion. It may be obvious. It may have been obvious to everyone else. It was as startling to me to come to that feeling as it was one day at the French Hotel when I walked up there, and the baristas, as usual, were fantastic, and there were people heading for the cheese board, and I looked at them, and suddenly, for the first time ever, I saw them that they were all going to die, and I didn't mean right then and there, but that of course they were all going to die someday. And perhaps that's what Ernest Becker was talking about in his book, Denial of Death, that I wasn't actively denying it, but I had never actually said it to myself that, yes, we're all going to die, and perhaps that will then affect how we live. But it happened at the French Hotel. It was such a strange moment. And of course, one wouldn't want to walk around with that idea in your head all the time. Because the world's full of miracles and full of life. But there it is. That's part of, for me, that's part of being 80.
Oh, sure. And, for people, many OLLI members who I'm very close to, who have suffered, the loss of a partner or a spouse, it's unthinkable. It's unthinkable. You obviously have to move forward, but how you hold on to that person, because you must and you will, but the different ways that people find to do that.
My wife and I, my friend Bob, a wonderful man, he when he died in his 80s, he had a rough time, he and his wife, the last few years of his life. Anyway, in the end, my wife drove me and Bob's ashes to Marin Headlands and to Rodeo Beach. And we got down there on the beach, and I didn't know what to do, because was I going to talk to Bob? Was I going to talk to some audience or whatever? But in the end, being a surfer, I just waited till I saw a lull in the sets at the edge of the water, and I strewed the ashes in the water, and I thought, well, I hope that Bob would have liked this, because he liked the ocean and so on. But those kind of partings are really strange and painful. I often think about, I often think of, let's say, my friend Chester Aaron, the marvelous writer, and so on. And these people are irreplaceable, but I suppose that one can try to do things that they would have enjoyed
Mhm,
knowing about or hearing about. Yeah.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, very definitely. Yeah, some form of spectacle or some form of intense intimacy. Sort of as one thinks about one's own desires around how to be remembered. One of the thoughts I had, I was reading your book, and I switched over to read the New York Times that had an article about um, how how so many people have a critic in their head, a kind of mental loop that keeps just bringing them to, either some form of limitation or feeling down. But it strikes me that one of the things, this is inappropriate for me to ask you. Do you ever feel down? No, I'm not going to ask that of you. I'm going to ask if in fact, by the by being a writer, by being curious, by using the writerliness, the act of writing, um, for that discovery, does that kind of keep the critic at bay so that what you're out front of those thoughts, that you're not doing what might be regarded as a doom looping about oneself, not about the world, but about oneself? Do you find, does writing with the discovery that you do, does that keep the negative critic at bay?
Uh, I haven't got time for a negative critic in the remaining time I have left. But uh, I would say that for
That's
me,
good.
among its other qualities,
Yeah.
writing has been a life raft. You think of Melville describing uh, uh, Ishmael popping to the surface on Queequeg's coffin, and it's not a great reach to think of Melville being saved by the extraordinary adventure of writing Moby Dick. So, in one regard, writing for me has been a life raft. And it's all these other things as well, right? It's word music, it's trying to learn stuff, it's trying to tell other people what you've learned. But in that aspect, it's also a little bit like Queequeg's coffin for Ishmael. Um, Melville is a great example of a life in writing in which he ceases to write after that prodigious amount of writing in his 20s and 30s. Then he goes silent in prose for a long time until he writes Billy Budd. But what happened to him when he didn't have the life raft of writing? It must have been very tough. Yeah.
Mm, mm. Is there, it strikes me, it's also the other kind of life raft for you is your connection with the ocean and with
Yes.
nature, that you do in fact pay attention to what is your surroundings, but also particularly, I think of the oceans, I think about how you write about waves,
Yeah.
somebody who's watched many, many waves in my lifetime. Um, just the whole thought about where waves come from, do they expire?
Yes.
Where do they go?
I once thought that they expire, and then I had to rethink that when they hit the
Yeah,
beach. Is that the end of them, or what do I know about really where energy goes, and what do I know
yeah,
about my own life's energy and
right.
the waves of that? But yes, there's a little beach in Hawaii that for decades has been what I call my church and my office. Of course, a church can't compete with the ocean, but one reaches for an analogy. So for sure, that beach is my church, but also it's my office because as a writer, even when I'm out surfing at first light, I'm watching Diamond Head. I'm surfing off Diamond Head, and I'm sitting in the lull, and I'm rising and falling. And then it occurs to me that maybe I'm the stationary object, and it's Diamond Head, that volcano that's rising and falling. And I said, "Oh, I think I can write about this." Yeah, and that's how that book began, the book called On Water. But yeah, I've been saved also by ocean and by this vast natural force. And it's good for people to be alone in the face of the vast. I think it gives them good perspective about some of our foolishness as humans.
Yeah, very true. Well, I have one more question, and thank you for your patience with my questions. And if anyone from the OLLI membership wants to ask, but the question again goes back to the younger generations that you spend this intimate time in the classroom with. Is there a nature deficit among them that you're aware of? Or do you think they find their own unique way to connect?
Geez, I don't know. I'm actually full of admiration for how they're making their way in the world. So let's say the last seminar I taught of graduate students, they're from very many different fields, but they still want to write about their lives directly, about a divorce, about traveling, about their childhood, about being an immigrant. And I find that very moving that they have that hunger, particularly in a world in which books don't have quite the same valence as they did when I was young. Books were a very romantic thing when I was young. And I think that's a little different now with so many different kinds of media and social media. So mostly I'm just moved by these archetypical hungers in them to tell the story of what happened to them and what's happening to them. Kind of doesn't bring tears to my eyes, but it's close. Yeah.
Oh, great. Oh, Tom, thank you very, very, very much for that. And thank you for this last hour. And your books are available at Berkeley bookstores as well as at Amazon. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. They'll find them. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great. And the library, of
Yeah.
course. Yeah. Any final comment?
No, just thank you. Thank you for having me. And people should feel free to get in touch with me. I'm easy to find at thomasfarber.org or at Cal at UC Berkeley through the Cal Mail. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, let me remind people that we've got Vital Aging happens the second Thursday of every month, except for the summertime. And that over this particular fall, we'll be having Roberta Pressman will join us in October to talk about the village movement, which is Ashby Village and other villages that are happening across the country around volunteers, neighbors, people helping each other out in fairly profound ways. So we'll talk about that in October. In November, Louise Mayer, who teaches memoir writing with us, has written a book called Poise for Retirement. And for those people who are still on that cusp between working and retiring, she has a way of looking at that decision point and looking at it from the emotional side rather than all the other metrics that people might use. And then in December, we have Christine Schaefer, who also teaches memoir writing. You can tell that this fall term is the time of going to the writers for wisdom. But Christine is going to actually teach self-defense. She and I always talk about what happens when daylight savings time goes away and it gets darker earlier. and we may not feel as safe outside after 4:30, 5 o'clock. What are some things that we can do that we know might keep us safer? So she will be on hand at the Golden Bear Center to work with us on some of those techniques. We will, in the beginning of the year, we will have a conversation about learning a new language. We'll look at relocating. This is what it would be like to move to another country, the concerns that, that are brought up. We will also have Liz Rosner, who is another local writer who has written a book about the third year and about ways of hearing all various forms of sounds. So it's going to be, it's a splendid year of our Vital Aging Forum. And obviously, everybody, please send us your comments, questions, if there are people or conversations, people you want to hear from, conversations you want to have. We want to learn that too. I also will be trying to put together a course for Ollie's spring term on the science of aging so that we go into where there is breakthroughs that are happening, and pulling from Berkeley, Stanford, the Buck Center, all of our local experts who are usually at that cutting edge. And obviously, as you know, Monday starts the fall term. And I hope I see many of you in Bill Sokol's course on the Roberts Court from bad to worse. And for the rest of the week, where there'll be lots of things happening. The end of the week, Don Tamaki will come and talk to us about the Reparations Commission, statewide commission, and how one can counter the challenges to the rightness, the moralness of reparation. That's it for the advertisements. Tom, again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan.
And I look forward to the next time we get a chance to talk.
Thank you again.
Okay, bye-bye.